The First Pharaoh. Prologue, the whisper of dried clay. The first truth of Kemet was that the world died every day. It died not with a roar of fire, but with the rasp of sand against bone. It had been 7 years since the great river, Iteru, the Nile, had truly risen in its power. 7 years of the sun, the indifferent eye of Ra, bearing down on the land until the earth split open like a weeping wound. In the forgotten settlement of Perwajet, where the clay walls were flaking back into dust and the remaining papyrus reeds curled into brittle scrolls of misery, the air itself tasted of pulverized regret. Look closely at the riverbed now, if you can call it that. It was a vast, sickening ribbon of cracked silt, miles wide in places. The bones of fish bleached white, relics of a world that once was, a world that was now a story told only to children too young to remember the smell of mud and abundance. The Kemetu people, survivors of this unending, cruel drought, moved with the slowness of the terminally weary. Their sacrifices were pitiful: a handful of dried grain, a cup of stagnant, brackish water poured onto the cracked banks. Offerings that were less a gesture of devotion and more a desperate, whispered plea, why? The answer came only in the sound of the dry wind, which carried the despair of 1,000 other dying villages. The great gods had abandoned them. Not through war or plague, but through silence. When the lifeblood of the earth, the Iteru, refused to flow, the people knew they were being judged, but they had forgotten the crime. And beneath this dust, beneath the ritual and the failing faith, a few minds were starting to turn. Not toward the heavens for salvation, but downward, to the unforgiving geometry of the dry earth itself. They knew, deep in their sun-scorched souls, that to survive, they could no longer rely on mercy. They had to invent permanence. The weight of 7 summers. The scent of burnt offering, usually a reassuring, smoky comfort, had become an acrid insult. It clung to the air over Perwajet like a fever, mixing with the sharp, dusty aroma of human sweat and starvation. Ramses, the chieftain, stood before the elders on the worn, smooth plaza. Ramses was a man built to rule in a world of muscle and memory. His shoulders were broad, his chin stubborn, and his voice carried the booming resonance of the last true storm they had heard. When he spoke of tradition, of the laws of their ancestors, the people listened, not because his solutions worked, but because his conviction was the only thing left that felt solid. The river demands reverence. Ramses shouted, his voice cracking slightly with the strain of leadership under pressure. We must give more. We must show that the blood of the Kemetu still honors the spirit of Iteru and the strength of the gods who sleep beneath the water. Around him, the gathered Kemetu shifted their weight, their eyes hollow. They had given everything, the last of the ceremonial oils, the final stores of precious incense brought from the south. Now, Ramses was talking about the children's meager grain rations again. At the edge of the crowd, partially shielded by the crumbling wall of a former storage hut, stood Amenhotep. Amenhotep was 30 years old, but his skin was permanently etched with the fine lines of relentless focus, making him look older than Ramses, though they were the same age. He did not possess Ramses' imposing frame. Amenhotep was lean, almost spare, and moved with a restless energy that seemed entirely out of place in their slow, dying town. His crime, the one that Ramses had used to banish him from the inner circle years ago, was simply thinking too much. While the others begged the gods, Amenhotep was watching the shadows. He carried no amulet, only a piece of tightly woven, knotted hemp rope, his personal measuring stick. He had spent the morning, as he had spent every morning for the past 4 years, at the edge of the dried-up riverbed. He wasn't praying to Hapi, the river god. He was arguing with the earth itself. The water level is not capricious, he thought, tracing a line in the dust with a long, thin stick. It is bound. It is a formula. It has a pattern. He had painstakingly recorded the height of the waterline from the previous year's pitiful flood by scratching lines onto a smooth boulder, one line for the day the water crested, and one for the day it began its retreat. He had then measured the angle of the sun at those moments, the shadow cast by the great clay shrine, and compared these readings to the ancient, almost forgotten star charts Hathor, the priestess, sometimes hinted at. His findings, to him, were terrifyingly simple: the floods were not random. The gods were not punishing them daily, they were simply following a calendar the Kemetu had forgotten how to read. They were pleading for rain on a day the sky was mathematically designed to be empty. Amenhotep felt a profound, intellectual rage burn within him. It was an anger against the waste, the unnecessary suffering caused not by divine malice, but by ignorance. Amenhotep. The voice was Ramses, sharp and commanding. Ramses had spotted the exile's lean figure. "Do you not offer your reverence to the great Iteru?" Ramses demanded, stepping closer. The crowd turned, their eyes shifting uncomfortably between the two men. This was their tension, their eternal conflict, the sweat and faith of Ramses versus the cold calculation of Amenhotep. Amenhotep stepped out from the shadow of the crumbling wall, holding his knotted rope. He ignored the question of reverence. Ramses saw his opportunity. He threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, dry sound that grated on the silence. "You measure the heavens with rope, Amenhotep?" Ramses spat, gesturing wildly. "You seek to steal the flood with a ruler? Your mind is poisoned by the knowledge of the old ones who came before, the ones who tried to build mountains and were swallowed by the sand. We are simple people. We live by faith. We are not giants seeking to command the sky." He snatched a ceremonial, sun-dried clay brick from a nearby altar, holding it up. "This is the strength of Kemet. Earth and water, bound by the sun. You seek to replace the true gods with a wicked formula, and for that, you will be banished completely. Go to the dunes, Amenhotep. Let your rope measure the emptiness, and let your calculations keep you company until the sun consumes you." The pronouncement was final. Amenhotep's gaze did not waver from Ramses. He knew the argument was lost not because it was false, but because Ramses needed the people to fear the gods more than they feared the drought. Fear gave Ramses power, knowledge gave it to the earth. Amenhotep simply nodded, turning his back on the town, the plaza, and the weary, fearful people who dared not look him in the eye. He carried only his water skin, his dry tools, and the heavy, granite weight of his conviction. "The clay you hold dissolves when the river truly returns, Ramses," he thought as he walked away, the soft dust muffling his footsteps. "My dream is built for when the river judges." Chapter 2, The Sun's Scourge. The Western Desert was the traditional place of exile. It was the land of Seth, the domain of violence and dry wind, where the dunes moved like living spirits, consuming any trace of man. To be sent there was a slow death sentence. Amenhotep walked for 6 days. The first 3 were defined by the dwindling weight of his water skin and the deepening lines of his hunger. He knew the desert, having tracked game and wild edibles there in his youth, but the desert of the 7th summer was different. It was hostile. Even the resilient desert scrub had withered to needles. His mind, however, was clearer than it had ever been. There was no sound of weeping children, no acrid scent of failing sacrifices. There was only the sound of his own sandals crunching the stone, and the vast, perfect silence of the sky. He realized the Kemetu's dependence on the Nile had made them soft, mentally, not physically. They believed that when the river failed, the world failed. Amenhotep saw the river's absence as a vast, empty canvas. A space for a new idea. He forced his thoughts away from water and onto weight. He remembered seeing the massive, irregular basalt stones that formed the valley's backbone, far older than the soft, new silt. They were the bones of the earth, strong, silent, and indifferent to the seasons. Why did they build with clay and reed, things that surrendered easily, when permanence was available? This contemplation became his purpose. He wasn't seeking water, he was seeking rock. Rock that refused to crumble. On the morning of the 6th day, the sun was a white-hot disk, stripping the color from the landscape. Amenhotep, staggering under the relentless glare, crested a massive, flat mesa, a high, desolate plateau where the wind had swept the sand down to the bedrock. And there it was. It was not a natural formation. It was a single, immense geometric chunk of stone, half buried in the ground. Dense, black, and perfectly cut. It was granite, the hardest material he had ever seen, unlike the local, crumbling sandstone. It was the size of 4 men, perfectly rectangular, and polished to a chilling, smooth sheen by centuries of wind. Amenhotep collapsed, not from exhaustion, but from the sudden, profound shock of encountering something impossible. This stone did not belong here. It was too precise. It spoke of a craftsmanship, a level of control, that was terrifying and sublime. It was the anti-clay. It was eternal. He crawled forward, his throat too dry to swallow, and reached out a trembling hand. The stone was impossibly cold beneath the burning sun. As he traced its smooth, unforgiving surface, Amenhotep felt a presence, but it was not divine. It was mechanical. This stone had not been prayed into existence, it had been willed into existence. It was deaf to prayer, silent to supplication. It listened only to the weight of will. He stayed there for 2 days, using his remaining water sparingly. He slept beside the stone, the heavy darkness of the granite a comfort against the cold, lonely night. In the deep quiet, his mind began to race, sketching impossible structures against the backdrop of the stars. If the clay surrenders, use the stone that does not. On the morning of the 8th day, driven by this new, hard clarity, Amenhotep used his meager iron chisel, a relic from his father, and hammered relentlessly. He chipped away, not at the colossal slab itself, but at a section already fractured by millennia of thermal stress. Finally, with a sharp, resonant crack, a fragment broke free. It was roughly the size of a loaf of bread, impossibly heavy, and dark as the night sky. He wrapped it in his dry cloth, hoisting it over his shoulder. This small, heavy piece of granite was his totem, the physical, cold truth of his ambition. His mud and reed huts were erased from his memory, replaced by the vision of immovable structures built from this immutable darkness. He turned his back on the mesa and headed back toward Perwajet, no longer a banished man seeking forgiveness, but a prophet carrying the secret to a new world. The priestess of logic. Amenhotep did not go back to the central plaza. He knew that Ramses' people would stone him if he appeared there, carrying the rock of the underworld. He went to the reed thicket at the south end of the town, where the goddess Hathor's shrine sat. Hathor, the priestess of the sky, was an anomaly. She was older than Ramses, but her eyes held a clarity that defied the drought. She was quiet, serene, and strangely powerful. The Kemetu respected her because her riddles, often based on star alignment, often came true. They did not realize she was not reading the gods' minds, but their clock. He found her tending to a few struggling lotus plants, a miracle in this season, in the shallowest part of the dried-up pond. They say the desert has bleached your mind, Amenhotep, Hathor said without turning around. They say you seek to replace faith with calculation. I seek to replace failure with permanence, Hathor, Amenhotep replied, dropping his tools and the heavy granite fragment. The fragment hit the baked clay with a resonant thud that seemed to rattle the stagnant air. Hathor turned, her gaze falling not on Amenhotep, but on the stone. She walked slowly toward it, knelt, and touched it. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of awe and profound, quiet recognition. She lifted the fragment. It was heavy enough to make her lean slightly, but she held it steady. "This is not from our earth," she murmured. "This is the language of what was before us. The gods live in wood and clay, because wood and clay are pliable, they rot, and they must be renewed yearly. That is the cycle. But you," she lifted her eyes to him, "you seek to break the cycle. You seek to live outside the seasons." She weighed the stone in her hand. "This stone is deaf to prayer, Amenhotep. It listens only to will. What do you wish to command?" "Order," Amenhotep stated simply. I wish to command the water, so that it never again commands us. I wish to build what does not dissolve. Hathor nodded slowly. Then you need more than will. You need the forgotten language. She led him through the dim, cool inner sanctum of her shrine. It was lined with aging clay tablets, protected carefully from the dry air. These were not the common, prayer-etched votives. These were the records of the lost civilization, scavenged by her ancestors. She pointed to one tablet, its surface etched with deep, angular symbols that were unlike the simple picture writing of the Kemetu. They were lines, squares, and circles, seemingly describing the precise relationships between shapes and distances. When the Great Ones left, Hathor explained, her voice low, they did not leave prophecies. They left blueprints. I can read the stars, but I cannot read the method written here. I need a hand that can turn concept into craft. You need a mind that understands this geometry. Amenhotep realized his rope and his calculations were only the beginning. He needed a true collaborator. Who? He asked, his heart thrumming with a terrible excitement. He is called Imhotep, she whispered, her eyes fixed on the strange, perfect angles of the black granite. He is the last of the quiet makers. He lives by the river's failure, obsessed with the geometry of things. He is a fool to the Kemetu, for he can lift a ton of rock with only a whisper of force, but he has no reverence for a single deity. He only reveres balance. The quiet maker. Imhotep was not physically small, but his presence was so muted, so focused on the inanimate world, that he often went unnoticed. He lived in a small lean-to on the bank where the Itaru had receded, a place most people avoided due to the foul smell of the shallow water. His hands were his language. They were calloused, not from heavy labor, but from the constant handling of wood, string, and stone fragments. His world was one of precise right angles and predictable leverage. When Amenhotep and Hathor approached him, Imhotep was using 3 small, carved wooden blocks and a length of twine to demonstrate the principle of the ramp to a bewildered goat. It is not strength that moves the world, Imhotep murmured to the goat, but the management of effort. See how the force is diffused by the angle? Amenhotep laid the black granite fragment at Imhotep's feet. Imhotep did not immediately look at the men. His eyes went straight to the stone. He crouched, but kept his hands clasped behind his back, refusing to touch it. He circled it slowly, his eyes calculating its density, its approximate mass, and the unforgiving smoothness of its surface. It is foreign, Imhotep concluded, speaking to the stone more than to the men. Perfectly dense. A slave to gravity. To lift this requires 4 things, the right angle, the right material, the right moment, and the right system. Amenhotep was electrified. This man spoke his own secret tongue. The river is a chaotic entity, Amenhotep pressed. It rises and falls. Our village is collapsing because it is built of clay, a slave to the river's chaos. I want to build a house of stone, Imhotep. A house that defies the flood and the drought, a house that will stand when the sky falls. I want to build order. Imhotep finally looked up, his quiet eyes meeting Amenhotep's intense gaze. He seemed to read the exile's ambition directly, bypassing words. He turned to the dry sand and began to draw, not pictures, but diagrams. Triangles, parallel lines, arcs. He pointed to the lines on Hathor's tablet, which Amenhotep had copied onto a piece of scraped leather. These are not prayers, Hathor. These are specifications. They describe the distance between a fixed point and the horizon. They describe how to divide a circle into 4 equal parts. This is the language of structure. Imhotep then used his finger to draw a long, segmented line, labeling the segments with strange marks. The first tool we need is not to lift the stone, but to understand the river's pulse, Imhotep stated. Amenhotep's theory is correct. The water is a formula. If we can measure its smallest rise and fall with precision, we can predict its nature. He looked at Amenhotep. We will invent the Nilometer. Not a grand, stationary one, but a simple, segmented wooden rod with precise markings. A tool to measure the pulse of the river daily. We will replace blind faith with quantifiable knowledge. This is the first step in building your eternal house. Amenhotep felt a profound, chilling sense of destiny. He had brought the will, Hathor the knowledge, and now Imhotep brought the method. The alliance was forged, not in blood or ritual, but in the cold, hard logic of geometry. The stage was set. The construction of the new world was about to begin, but first, they had to survive Ramses' fury and the impending, terrible return of the great river. Amenhotep knew that their small, wooden measuring stick was a more dangerous weapon against the old ways than any bronze sword.